Hi everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, Accepted. It's your host, Jenna Jolly, and in this episode, we are visiting whether or not the SAT still passes the test. After the Washington Post released a very opinionated op-ed on whether or not colleges should bring back the SAT or not, it gave some insight into where your college application should stand in this new day and age of test optional. So let's get started. So before I talk about the SAT and how the Washington Post kind of phrases it, I want to start out with my own experience with the SAT. So when I was in high school, I took the SAT 4 times. I paid for every single one with my little World Market paycheck on my own, and it was something I wanted to do and I wanted to get better at because I knew that maybe it would be influential into a college application. Even when I was starting to apply for colleges, it was starting to become... You were starting to see more and more schools become test optional. And when you saw more and more schools become test optional, it definitely was seeming like the value of the SAT and the ACT were starting to decrease. You were starting to see less students really care about their SAT scores, and they were definitely a bit more focused on other aspects of their application. And I remember people saying like all the time how is one test supposed to represent your 4 years of high school? Like, we should be looking into different aspects of a student's application and not just putting so much emphasis on a test. And so in my experience, you might be thinking, after I tell you this story about my first time taking the SAT, you might be thinking, Jenna, there is no way you are a fan of the SAT. Like, there's no way. You took it 4 times. There's no way. And in that moment, I was starting to hate the SAT. I was really starting to hate it. So here's my story. So when I was 16, I was a junior in high school. I went to a private Christian, small Christian private school. I love that school, but out of everybody in my graduating class, I think only 3 of us ended up going to college, so going into higher education. So you definitely did not have a lot of people that were... I didn't have a lot of people that were in the same boat as me, which is hard for anybody, but so I didn't know much about the SAT, really. It was kind of just one of those things that my parents told me to do because it was what they did, and so on and so forth. So I decided to go take the SAT. I go through the online process this spring of my junior year, and so... Oh my gosh, looking back, the first time I took the SAT, it was a mess. But so if you don't know, you show up to the testing center on a Saturday morning, and it was not at a high school I'd ever been to before. So I showed up to this high school I'd never been at before at 7:30 on a Saturday morning in my little Honda Civic, and it is dumping rain. And I mean, it is dumping rain. I remember the night before the test, absolutely looking up videos on how to survive the SAT, like, what do I do? What do I need? And when they say it's like TSA, it is like TSA once you walk through those doors. Once you walk through those double doors of a high school to go take the SAT, that's it. There is no going back. You better have your ID, you better have your testing slip, or you're done. And so I was already freaking out. I really did not know updated rules. I think now you can have a backpack. I think, don't quote me on that. But it was just, I remember I walk in and I immediately drop my calculator, and the guy who hands it to me was a guy I went to kindergarten with. And it was one thing I will say, a little side note here, is if you have gone to school with people and grown up in a school system, when you go to take the SAT, it is kind of funny to see the people that you used to like share Play-Doh with in kindergarten all in the same step. So I thought that was always a really cool aspect when I went and took the SAT. However, I finally, in this giant high school, find my testing room, and I go in, I tell the girl my name, and I sit down, and I look up, and 2 desks over was my ex-boyfriend. And it didn't really matter. I just thought it was really funny because I was soaking wet. I looked like a wet rat. And seriously, I think my socks were soaked through. Like, when I tell you it was dumping rain, it was like a Category 5 hurricane had hit that Saturday morning. I kid you not. There was so much water everywhere. But alas, I sit down and I see my ex-boyfriend 2 seats ahead of me, and I was like, oh, this is ironic. We ended up having great conversation, but I just thought that was really, really ironic for the situation, because I was already stressed out of my mind, and it was just funny. So I go in, I sit down, and when I took the SAT this time, I more so was taking it to see where I would place and how I did with very little preparation. Like I said, I went in like a bull in a china shop, really. And it was miserable. I'm not even gonna lie. I got out of the testing center, I walked back to my car, and I just sobbed because the whole experience to me was just so unbelievably stressful. And it wasn't I'm trying to make it sound a little better, because I am, at the end of this, going to tell you to go take your SAT. But I could have been prepared for it a little better. But that was my first time taking it. And it did get better after that. So I get my scores back, and you usually have to wait like 2 to 3 weeks to get your scores back. So I open up the email that says I got my scores, and it was not what I was expecting it to be. It was not what I wanted. It was nowhere near what I wanted my score to be, and it was definitely a punch to the ego. You know, I was in National Honor Society in high school. I was very active in academics. I was really into a lot of extracurriculars that were very academically based. And so to take my SAT and not have it reflect that I could see where some people would say this test is like, it's not what is a good representation of who you are for a college exam, or for colleges to look at. And I think there is a little truth to that, but I think in my experience, and we'll get to it later, in my experience, the test score should not be as heavily weighted as I think people put on an SAT. Because some people, they need that SAT, you know, and that's what's really going to show them. Like my brother, for example, he just took the SAT, and he hates school. He hates it so much. He doesn't study, yet he still gets great grades, and I don't know how he does it, but he took the SAT, first time, got like a 1500. And I was like, how in the world did you do that? It's not fair. But he didn't do any of the extracurriculars that I did, you know. It's a very interesting process. But anywho, my second time going in to take the SAT, I'd signed up for a couple more classes and study preps and such to just kind of help me a little bit more. And I ended up working with my boyfriend at the time. He ended up helping me because he had taken it a year before me. And so he was helping me study for it. And I went into the second SAT, and I did a little better. It was still not the score I wanted, and so I took it again, and then I finally had a very drastic improvement between my second score and my third score, and then I was like, okay, one more round of this, and I think I'll be set. And I did it one more time, and I felt so good going into that test and coming out of it that I was like, okay, I finally did it. So, and I took my fourth one my senior year. So it took a while. It took a while for me to get there, but I think in my education and for me as a person, it was going to be a struggle for me anyway, getting used to it. It takes me a while to acclimate to certain things, especially new things when it comes to academics. So I should have seen it coming, but I'd wished I started it sooner, prepping for it sooner. But again, we were kind of in this age of it's test optional, I really don't care. But at the same time, I was like, maybe it will help. Who knows? So now I'm going to be talking about the whole test optional and kind of circling back to this op-ed. So this op-ed is it was released by the Washington Post on February 27th, 2024. And the main author is Mary Duenwald. And the title of it is Colleges Are Bringing Back the SAT. It's the Right Move. So circling back around to that whole test optional, where did it come from? So test optional has kind of always been a thing. It's just when the pandemic hit, it started to become even more of a thing because testing centers, it was hard to administer the test. It was very hard to get the test out to people. So that's why more colleges became test optional. And so one thing about test optional I want to put out there first is test optional does not mean, it honestly, when a school goes test optional, the SAT becomes borderline useless because they can't, if you submit your SAT score, it can't really, schools were saying it wasn't going to boost your chances, but it wasn't going to hinder your chances either. So it kind of became this point where it was like, well, why in the world am I even taking the SAT if you're not going to see my score and take it into consideration? So I think a lot more students were just like, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. I have 4 years of high school under my belt, or I guess on a college admission or a college application, you have 3. So I've got 3 years of college under my belt. I've got tons of hours of community service, or not community service, of volunteering. I've got tons of extracurriculars that are just stellar. And I was part of National Honor Society, got a 4.0. I've just absolutely killed it so far in high school. And that's great. That's awesome. But a lot of those things, a lot of other kids do as well. They're like, yes, I was in a National Honor Society, but so were 40 other kids in my high school. So it kind of, with those extracurriculars, yeah, they're cool. And yeah, they definitely look good to colleges. They're not going to be a good baseline of setting yourself apart. And with that being said, I think to set yourself apart, you really have to look at the SAT score. Because I can tell you right now, it took me 4 times to get through the SAT, and I still didn't have a score that was good enough for Yale. And I'm going to say this right now, there is no way in the world I should be accepted onto Yale's campus. I mean, maybe on vacation I'll go to Yale, but I should not go to Yale. I don't have anything that Yale should have in a student. I don't belong in an Ivy. In fact, my score was a good baseline to see what colleges I would do better at and would have more success at. So with colleges bringing back the SAT, it's the right move, the Washington Post says. I genuinely do think it's the right move. They go in a little bit further to say that with new data, the SAT helps minorities, and because that was another aspect, is the SAT, diminishing students of color or minorities from getting into college. And in the new studies they found, the SAT is actually a better way to tell if a student is suitable for an application if they go to these, because most students of minority, they can be really, really smart, but it can be hard for them to have the extracurricular aspects that a lot of other students do. And the SAT, at the end of the day, everybody is just a number. And it sounds really awful to say, but it's a good, solid grounding point to see where you belong. So I am a big, big fan of the SAT. I'm not really talking about the ACT because I don't have much experience with the ACT, but both of those standardized tests are something that should be treated as it's another aspect to your application that is just going to show you where you belong. And I really don't think there's no such thing as a bad SAT score. So it's, at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a bad score. So if you go in to take it, and just go in with an open mind. Because like I said, you probably can't do worse than me. You probably can't do worse than me on my first time taking the SAT. But there is hope. There is hope. But one thing that Duenwald points out in her article that I think is really interesting is MIT, they did a study because they started to accept applicants with lower SAT scores. They found that, and this is a quote, found that applicants, it admitted, despite lower scores, were more likely to drop out. So what that told me was that yes, they had a lower score, and yes, it seemed like, they probably had those stellar extracurriculars, but they weren't able to meet the benchmark of academics that a university or an institution is going to offer. And that's why I think it is so important to take your SAT score, just so you know where you can fit on that scale of academics. So that's kind of what Duenwald says. And I thought it was really fascinating to see that colleges are starting to look back into taking the SAT. And she later goes in that same article in providing solutions onto how to make the SAT a little bit better, because I'm not going to be here to critique the SAT. My main point I want to drive across, I really want to drive home, is that the SAT is not your enemy. It's not. It is honestly going to be such a powerful factor in self-reflection of where you should be at a university. Because when touring a college campus, they're all pretty much going to have the same things, okay? They're all, there's going to be some things that set them apart, and there's going to be some differences. But at the end of the day, college comes down to the education you want to receive. And it's the education you're going to fit in best. And so taking the SAT and wanting to further your education is a good baseline to go off of. Because, I had another friend, this is another example. She took the SAT. She did not do very well on it. And she wanted to go to a 4-year school. And she had her sights set on this one 4-year school. She was like, I really, really want to go, but my SAT score is just not good. She applies to this one school. She doesn't get in. There could have been other factors as well to it. I'm not saying it's mainly the SAT, but she doesn't get in, and she ended up going to a community college, and she's still at that community college to this day, and she was like, she's very happy at the decision she made. She was like, I fit in so much better here than I think I would have at that school. And she has no regrets whatsoever. Of course, she was a little bummed when she got the rejection letter, but she's like, looking back, I have no regrets on it. So, but going back to the article, Duenwald gives some insight on where we can go with the SAT and a solution to make the SAT a little better, because it's not perfect. One thing I'm going to add is I think the SAT should stay a paper test. I do think the paper test needs some work. It's not very aesthetically pleasing, and if you have transfer issues like I do, it's not fun either. But I hate Scantrons. But I think it should stay a paper test. And I think another thing I think should be happening is I think the SAT should be either cheaper. I don't know if it should be free, because I can understand wanting to make money off of it, because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a money-making thing. I don't think it should be as much as it is, because I think with like all of the testing, preparation stuff and courses I took and prep materials on top of the test itself, I'd probably put at least $1,000 into my SAT. And that's insane. Like, that is maybe under $1,000, but it's probably around there. And that was like not even a guarantee that I'd get into college. It was just prep materials. So it can add up, and she mentions that in the end of this article, that it should be, that there is a financial bias to it, and that can exclude minorities in a way. And another thing she says is there should be more testing dates, and I 100% agree with that. Now, I think if you really get the ball rolling on your SAT and you take the PSAT your freshman year, and then you start taking the SAT probably the spring of your sophomore year, just to kind of see where you're at with it, and just, if you get a good score your sophomore year of high school, then hey, you're done. Like, now you can get some more extracurriculars in there. Who knows? But I think utilize the testing dates. Don't wait too late on it. But I do think if it was administered more often, then you would get more kids taking it. And I think that would be a very important thing in bringing back the value the SAT has on an application. Because if you can do better on it, because one of the main things I always heard in high school was that students had never seen a test like the SAT. It is such a different test to the ones you receive in high school that it really does become an exposure thing. And you'll even see patterns on it. And it's a really interesting thing. So, I think more testing dates would really benefit students, and you would see value increase in the SAT. So, obviously, with all this being said, I did make it to college. I'm recording this from my dorm room. So I'm hoping that you come away from this episode with a new perspective and a positive outlook on the SAT. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's probably not going to be the most fun time of your life taking the SAT, but you can do it. It is just a step in your college success, and it is just a moment. It is just a moment. Anywho, Next week, we're going to be diving back into some more college tips and how to boost your application as a whole. Some very awesome extracurriculars, and the next week after that we'll be talking about GPA and how to boost those grades no matter where you are in high school. Keep up the success, and I look forward to next week's episode. Thank you so much.